You still look for him, don't you? That was the question that shattered the quiet sanctuary of my Monday morning ritual. It was a cold, damp January day, and Cafe Americano was filled with its usual crowd of busy commuters and college students lost in their screens. I sat in my regular corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that the servers always saved for me, spreading out the worn pages of cold case files that nobody paid me to solve anymore. When you spend 35 years of your life as a private investigator, retirement is a word that doesn't really mean much. You don't just turn off the instinct to look for the missing, to find the truth, to solve the puzzles that have haunted you for decades. It keeps the mind sharp, I always told myself. But the truth was much simpler and much more painful. It kept me from thinking about the one case I could never solve, the one that tore my life apart. I was halfway through my second cup of bitter black coffee when a man sat down across from me without asking. He was in his late 30s, wearing an expensive charcoal overcoat that looked like he had slept in it. His dark hair was beginning to thin at the temples, and his face was clean-shaven, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. They held a deep, heavy weariness that I recognized instantly. It was the look of someone who had spent a lifetime running from a shadow he couldn't outrun. I stared at him, my investigator's flat, neutral expression sliding into place automatically. Before I could ask him who he was or what he wanted, he reached into a leather messenger bag and pulled out a plain manila folder. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it on the table between us. "My name is Julian," he said softly. "And 35 years ago, on a freezing afternoon in Rittenhouse Square, a 3-year-old boy vanished without a trace." The world around me seemed to tilt, the ambient chatter of the cafe fading into a dull, distant hum. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. January 18th, 1989, 4:15 in the afternoon. The date and time were burned into my very soul like a brand, a permanent scar of the day my son was taken. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice rough and cracked. He looked straight into my eyes, and for a fleeting second, the resemblance was so striking it made my heart stop. "I'm your son," he said. I wanted to believe him. God help me. More than anything in this world, I wanted to believe that the miracle I had prayed for every single night of my miserable life had finally come true. But 35 years of disappointment and investigative training had taught me to be cynical, to look for the angle. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "My son is gone. He's been dead to this world for over 3 decades. Julian shook his head slowly, opening the folder with meticulous care, as if he were handling the most fragile evidence in the world. "I was taken," he explained, his voice calm but thick with emotion. "I was sold to an Eastern European trafficking ring. I spent 15 long years in Bucharest, surviving on the streets and in grim orphanages, before I was finally adopted in the year 2000 by an American couple who brought me back to New Jersey. They changed my name, gave me a new life, but they never knew where I came from." He slid an old, faded Polaroid across the table. It was a picture of a little boy sitting on the front steps of a red brick house, laughing as a golden retriever licked his face. My hands went completely cold. I had taken that photograph myself in the summer of 1988 outside our old home on Spruce Street. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my eyes burning. "It was in the adoption file," Julian said, along with a copy of the old newspaper clipping about my disappearance. And then he pulled back his left sleeve, revealing his wrist. Just below the joint was a jagged, 2-inch white scar shaped like a bolt of lightning. I gasped, the final wall of my defense crumbling. He had gotten that scar when he was 18 months old, falling backward onto a broken mug while trying to reach a cookie jar on the kitchen counter. My late wife, Rebecca, had cried harder than the baby did when the doctor put in the stitches. She used to joke that it made him look like a tiny Harry Potter, a detail we never shared with the media or the police. Julian leaned forward, his hazel eyes locking onto mine. "I did a DNA test a few months ago," he said. "It matched with you. Thomas Vance, former investigator. I've spent almost a year gathering the courage to find you. I know my mother passed away in 1995. I know you've been searching for me. But Vincent, there's a reason I came to find you now, and it's not just to reunite. We need to talk about my grandfather's estate. The trust fund worth over $140 million, and I need your help to access it. The hope that had flared in my chest suddenly turned cold and sharp. In my 35 years of chasing cheats and liars, I had learned one universal truth. When a miracle presents itself, always look for the price tag. $140 million. The sheer scale of the number made my head spin. My father, Walter Vance, had been a federal prosecutor, a man of rigid principles and quiet, immense wealth inherited from his family. We had been estranged for the last decade of his life, fighting constantly over my career choices and my lifestyle. He died in 2010, leaving me his modest house and some savings, but he had never once mentioned a massive trust fund. I contacted my old partner, Mac Kelly, a rugged, cynical former detective who had been my right hand for 12 years before we both called it quits. We sat in his parked SUV outside the genetic testing clinic the next afternoon, watching the rain smear across the windshield. "Are you out of your mind, Tom?" Mac asked, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. "A guy shows up out of nowhere, claiming to be your long-lost kid, and he just happens to need access to a multi-million-dollar trust fund? It's too neat. It's too convenient." "I know," I replied, staring at the sterile clinic building. But he knew about the scar. He knew about the dog sleeping under the stairs. He had Rebecca's journal, Mac. Details that were never in the police reports. "I have to know the truth." Mac sighed, shifting the car into park. "I ran a background check on this Julian Reeves. On paper, he's clean. No criminal record. Lives in a high-priced penthouse in Newark. Owns an investment firm called Reeves Capital. But the financials are weird, Tom. The company doesn't seem to have any real clients, yet he's paying over $4,000 a month in rent. Something doesn't add up." We walked into the clinic, where Julian was already waiting for us. He looked tense, his fingers locked together as he sat in the minimalist waiting area. Dr. Lisa Hartman, a sharp, efficient geneticist, met us at the desk and led us into a small private office. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Vance, we expedited your paternity test using the buccal swabs we collected yesterday," she said, opening a sleek folder. "The results are conclusive. The genetic markers show a match probability of 99.97%. There's no doubt. Julian is your biological son." The breath left my lungs in a sudden, painful gasp. Max swore softly under his breath, stepping back. I looked at Julian, who had stood up, tears streaming down his face. Before I could think, before my cynical investigator's mind could raise another alarm, we were embracing. He was shaking in my arms, and for the first time in 35 years, the gaping void in my heart felt like it might actually heal. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into his shoulder, weeping openly. "I'm sorry I didn't find you. I'm sorry for all the years we lost." "It's not your fault, Dad," Julian sobbed, using the word for the first time. But as we pulled apart, the reality of the situation returned. We sat down with Julian's attorney, Gerald Foster, in a lavish conference room downtown. Foster, a man with perfectly coiffed silver hair and an expensive suit, laid out the legal reality. "Your father established this trust in 1988. Right after Julian was born," Foster explained. "The terms are highly specific. The funds are held in an irrevocable trust, meant solely for Walter's grandchildren. Julian can only access them when he turns 35, but the trust requires the joint consent and identity verification of the primary trustee, which is you, Mr. Vance. Julian is 38 now. He's been eligible for 3 years, but he needs you to sign a non-judicial settlement agreement to release his portion early." "We split it," Julian said, his eyes filled with a desperate intensity. "$70 million for you, $70 million for me. I have time-sensitive business investments that require immediate capital, Dad. If we don't execute this before the end of the quarter, the tax penalties will be catastrophic." I looked at Mac, who gave me a subtle, warning shake of his head. The professional investigator in me was screaming. The urgency, the massive sum, the slick lawyer. It had all the hallmarks of a sophisticated scam. But the DNA test was real. The boy standing before me was indeed my son. "I need time to think," I told them, standing up. "I need to process all of this." Julian's face fell, a flicker of sharp frustration crossing his features before he quickly masked it with a look of deep, wounded disappointment. "Of course," he said quietly. "I just hope you don't take too long. My entire life is riding on this." The seed of doubt had been planted, and once it took root in my mind, it began to grow rapidly. I spent the next 48 hours sitting in my kitchen, staring at the 52 pages of dense legal jargon in the settlement agreement. Every clause, every spendthrift provision and fiduciary duty seemed designed to confuse and obscure. I hadn't signed a single page. On Thursday evening, Julian called me, his voice tight and strained, bordering on panic. "I need you to come to my penthouse tonight, Tom," he said, abandoning the casual dad he had been using. "It's urgent. I have the financial audits from my firm. I want to show you exactly why I need this money, so you can see I'm not trying to con you." I agreed, but before I left, I checked the .38 snub-nosed revolver in my ankle holster. It was an old habit, but in my line of work, you never walked into a desperate situation unarmed. Julian's penthouse in Newark was spectacular. A sweeping, ultra-modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. It was the kind of home that screamed success, but to an experienced investigator, it felt like a stage set. It was too clean, too perfectly curated, lacking any real signs of permanent habitation. Julian led me to a glass dining table where a laptop sat open next to several neatly bound folders. "This isn't about greed, Tom," he said, his face pale and drawn. "It's about survival." He slid a folder toward me. The cover page read Reeves Capital Management, Q4 Financial Audit. "My firm manages private equity," he explained, gesturing to the screen. "We had $90 million under management. Last month, we made a major play into commercial real estate in Jersey City. But the deals collapsed. The sellers backed out, took our deposits, and now we are contractually obligated to cover an $8 million shortfall to our primary investors by the end of the week. If I don't get a bridge loan from the trust, I lose everything. My reputation, my business, my freedom." I scanned the audit reports, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the clean, rounded figures. There were no cents, no detailed itemizations, no supporting schedules. "Who audited this?" I asked. "Bradley & Shun, a boutique accounting firm out of Princeton," Julian replied without hesitation. I made a mental note of the name. "And if I don't sign the trust documents?" I asked, watching his reaction closely. "Then I'm ruined," he said, his voice cracking with a desperate, childlike vulnerability. "I'm asking my father to save me. I don't have $8 million in cash, Julian," I said quietly. "But you have lines of credit, home equity, connections from your days as a PI," he pleaded, leaning closer. "Please." I stood up and pushed the folder back across the table. "I can't do that, Julian. Not on a few days' notice for a business I know nothing about." Julian's expression shifted, the vulnerability vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. "You still think I'm a con artist, don't you?" He sneered. "After the DNA test, after everything. You're just going to let your own son drown because you're too paranoid to trust anyone." "I'm going to go home and think about it," I said, walking toward the door. I left his penthouse with a heavy heart, the gap between the son I had lost and the man standing before me growing wider by the second. As soon as I got to my car, I called Mac. "Did you run those names?" I asked. Mac's voice on the other end was grim. "I did, Tom. Reeves Capital isn't registered with the SEC. No filings, no disclosures, no assets under management. And Bradley & Shun? There is no accounting firm by that name in the entire state of New Jersey. Julian's entire business is a ghost. He's running a massive scam, and you are his mark." My heart sank into my stomach. The DNA was real, but the son who had returned to me was a liar, a criminal who was using my decades of grief to steal a fortune. But the question remained, why was he so desperate? Who was he running from? The answers came the very next morning, but they weren't the ones I had expected. At 10 a.m., my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, a calm, authoritative voice identified himself as Special Agent Ray Thompson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He asked me to come to the federal building in Philadelphia immediately, stating it was a matter of national security regarding my son, Julian. I drove to the concrete and glass fortress on Arch Street, my mind racing with 100 different scenarios. Agent Thompson met me in the lobby and led me to a high-security, windowless conference room. Sitting at the table was Nadia Patel, an assistant U.S. attorney with sharp, dark eyes and an imposing stack of legal binders. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming," she said, her voice formal and direct. "We've been running a major RICO investigation called Operation Silent Ledger for the past 18 months. We are targeting a violent Albanian organized crime syndicate operating out of New York and New Jersey. Drug trafficking, extortion, and high-level money laundering. The head of this syndicate is a man named Victor Krasniqi." Agent Thompson slid a surveillance photograph across the table. It was a high-resolution shot of Julian standing next to a black Mercedes in an industrial area of Port Newark. Standing next to him, with a cold, menacing grip on Julian's shoulder, was an older Eastern European man with sharp features and ruthless eyes. "That's Victor Krasniqi," Agent Thompson said. "And your son, Julian, is his primary money launderer." My jaw dropped, the room suddenly feeling very small. "Julian? A money launderer?" "Yes," Patel confirmed, turning her laptop toward me. "Julian has moved over $300 million through a complex web of offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and Tirana since 2019. He takes a 3.5% commission. He has made millions, Mr. Vance. But last year, he developed a severe gambling addiction. He lost everything in Atlantic City and Macau, and when he ran out of money, he began dipping into Krasniqi's funds. Currently, he is $25 million in debt to the syndicate, and Krasniqi has given him a deadline, January 22nd, which is tomorrow. If he doesn't pay, he's a dead man. That's why he targeted you, Tom," Agent Thompson explained gently. "He didn't just stumble upon your DNA profile. He found it 2 years ago, but he waited to make contact until the trust fund was close to maturity and his debts became life-threatening. He crafted this entire heart-wrenching narrative about being sold to traffickers, the orphanages, the longing for his father. All of it was a carefully constructed con designed to make you sign over the $140 million so he could pay off the mob and save his own skin." I sat back in my chair, completely numb. The tears, the emotional reunion at the clinic, the beautiful words about his mother. It was all a performance. A cruel, calculated play on my deepest, most painful trauma. But then, Agent Thompson dropped the final, devastating bombshell. "The kidnapping in 1989, Tom. It wasn't a random crime. Your father, Walter, was the lead prosecutor who put Angelo Battaglia, the underboss of the Albanian syndicate, in prison for 25 years back in 1985. Battaglia swore revenge on your father's bloodline. They took Julian to punish Walter. But instead of killing the boy, they kept him, raised him within the syndicate, and turned him into a weapon to be used against his own family. I couldn't breathe. My son had been stolen from me because of my father's crusade, raised by the very monsters who took him, and now he was back to destroy what was left of us. He's a criminal," Patel said, "but he's also a victim of a generational vendetta. His wife, Lauren, secretly cooperated with us last week in exchange for immunity. She gave us his offshore accounts and passwords. Julian is completely cornered, and tomorrow he will either be murdered by Krasniqi or spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Unless you help us." The FBI's proposal was simple, cold, and utterly terrifying. They wanted me to wear a wire. They needed me to meet Julian tomorrow morning at the Peninsula Hotel under the pretense of finally signing the trust agreement. My job was to get him to confess, on tape, to 3 specific things: his $25 million debt to Krasniqi, his plan to defraud the trust fund using the fraudulent settlement agreement, and his history of money laundering for the syndicate. If I could get those admissions on a voluntary recording, the government would have the leverage they needed to force Julian to cooperate, testify against Krasniqi, and enter the Federal Witness Protection Program. It was his only shot at staying alive. I spent Sunday night in my basement office, surrounded by the ghosts of my past. The walls were lined with the white boards and filing cabinets of 35 years of cold cases, but my eyes kept drifting back to a single framed photograph on my desk. It was Rebecca, smiling on the porch of our old house on Spruce Street, holding Julian when he was just a toddler. She had spent 6 agonizing years searching for him, destroying her mind and body with grief until it finally claimed her life in 1995. I had always blamed myself for her death, for not being there the day Julian was taken, for giving up when she couldn't. Now, 35 years later, the universe had handed me a sick, twisted chance to save my son. But to save him, I had to betray him. I had to trick him into destroying his own freedom. I pulled out a piece of lined paper and began to write, my hand trembling as the ink spilled onto the page. Julian, I wrote, I wanted you back for 35 years. Every day, every case I worked, every missing child I found for other families, I was secretly searching for you. But not like this. Your mother died because she couldn't live without you. I gave up, and that is my failure, not yours. Tomorrow, I am going to record you confessing to the crimes that will send you to prison. I am doing it because it is the only way to keep you alive. The monsters who raise you have turned you into a weapon, but I will not let them kill you. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. I wouldn't forgive myself either. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Rebecca's old journal, locking it in the desk drawer. At 9 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in an FBI tactical van parked 2 blocks from the Peninsula Hotel. A young technician was busy fitting me with the recording equipment. He slipped a high-tech camera disguised as a cheap plastic pen into my vest pocket, adjusting the tiny lens so it faced forward. Next came the leather belt, which contained a hidden microphone and transmitter sewn into the buckle. Finally, he handed me a small, flat black button. Your panic button, Tom, Agent Thompson said, his face grave. If anything goes sideways, if you feel threatened for even a second, press this. The SWAT team is staged in the basement and will breach the restaurant in 8 seconds flat. Remember, you're not an investigator today. You're a grieving, desperate father who wants answers. Let your real emotions drive the conversation. Don't lead him. Don't interrogate him. Just let him talk. I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy weight of the wire against my skin. I'm ready, I said, though it was the biggest lie I had ever told. The Peninsula Hotel restaurant was quiet and elegant, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my chest. I sat in a secluded corner booth, watching the entrance as the minutes ticked down to 10 a.m. In the background, I could see several undercover FBI agents positioned at nearby tables, sipping coffee and reading newspapers, their eyes constantly scanning the room. At precisely 10 o'clock, Julian walked in. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild with panic. He slid into the booth across from me, his hand shaking violently as he immediately reached for my collar, checking my jacket pockets, and patting down my chest. "Where's your phone?" he demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "I left it in the car," I replied, keeping my voice flat and tired. "I forgot it, Julian. I'm 62. I'm stressed. I don't care about the phone." He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, his fingers brushing past the hidden camera in my pen and the panic button in my lining without realizing what they were. Finally, he sat back, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Okay," he muttered. "I had to be sure. We don't have much time, Tom. Krasnichi's people are waiting. Did you bring the signed agreement?" I looked at my son, the boy I had lost, the man who had been raised by wolves, and I felt a profound, overwhelming sadness. "Why did you lie to me, Julian?" I asked softly. The question caught him off guard. His defensive mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the terrified, desperate boy underneath. "I didn't lie about the DNA," he said, his voice cracking. "But yes, I lied about the rest. I owe Victor Krasnichi $25 million. I've been laundering money for his syndicate since 2019, over $300 million. I gambled his cash away, and if I don't pay him by 5 p.m. today, they're going to execute me. I targeted you because of the trust fund. I was going to use the settlement agreement to drain the $140 million and run." There was all 3 confessions laid bare on the digital tape. The trap was sprung, but I felt no triumph, only a crushing weight of grief. "Your mother died because she couldn't find you," I said, tears finally spilling over my eyes. She spent her life looking for the innocent boy they took from that park. And you came back to steal from the only family you have left. Julian's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, the cold, calculating criminal vanished. I'm sorry, he sobbed, leaning across the table. I wanted to feel something when the DNA match came back. I wanted to be your son. But I don't remember you, Tom. I don't remember Rittenhouse Square or Spruce Street. All I know is a life of fear, crime, and survival. This trust fund was my only way out. Please, you have to sign it. If you don't, I'm a dead man. I looked at him, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. I can't sign it, Julian, I said, because I love you too much to let you keep destroying yourself. Before he could react, I saw Agent Thompson and a dozen armed federal officers move swiftly toward our booth. Julian's eyes widened in sudden, horrific realization as the handcuffs clapped around his wrists. He looked at me, a mixture of shock, betrayal, and absolute hatred burning in his eyes. You set me up, he screamed as they dragged him away. You're not my father. You're a monster. I sat in the empty booth, completely alone, as the restaurant cleared. My son was alive, safe from the syndicate's bullets, but he was gone from me forever. I had saved his life, but in doing so, I had lost him for the second time. And as I stared at the empty seat across from me, I knew it was a burden I would have to carry for the rest of my days.